When you're there and I'm here, you're sort of occupying the space inside of your head, right? I'm kind of sitting him somewhere at a point, inside of my head somewhere, right? And we're having this conversation. You could say that the conversation is in the air in the middle, right? But if we now put a drawing into that space and we create a drawing together, now we actually have 3 points of triangulation. We have where you are, where I am, and the drawing. And now we have actually 3 different perspectives. And if you do a drawing and if I do a drawing, and if we have 2 drawings, now we have four points of triangulation, and we can overlap.
Welcome to the Conversation Factory. I'm your host, Daniel Stillman. Each episode, I'll talk to an amazing conversation designer to try and distill insights we can all bring into our work and lives. Human conversation is a material that can be shaped by design, and shifting conversations in everyday meetings, in organizations, and yourself can create real change. And I hope to help you do it better and more authentically. I'd love to have you stay part of the conversation. Head over to theconversationfactory.com to sign up for my newsletter and never miss an episode. That's theconversationfactory.com. I'd also love for you to be part of the show. If there's a challenging transformation you're working through, head over to theconversationfactory.com, click coaching, and sign up for 30 minutes of free coaching that I might use on the show. Head over to theconversationfactory.com, hit coaching, and let me know what conversations you need help redesigning. Enjoy the episode. Today I talk with Dave Gray, author of Game Storming and Liminal Thinking. We kick things off with a Zen Story and dig into why Dave wrote this new book. We hit on a wide range of topics, from the nitty-gritty of facilitating group conversations to organizational change being fueled more by emotion than reason. Dave's books have always opened new pathways in my brain, so I hope you enjoy unpacking some of the lessons inside with me. One of the reasons I pulled the opening quote about drawing is that it's without a doubt the most powerful way to transform any conversation. Most conversations have one interface, the air. Once it's past your eardrums, I have no idea what's really going on in someone's head. Drawing makes sure there's a tangible record. Hell, a paper trail of our conversation. What we've agreed to, what's in or out of the conversation. A few months ago now, I helped my mom and dad work out some scenarios around selling their house and moving someplace else. Me and my brother, together with my folks, generated as many options as we could. They move and rent out their big house. They sell it all and rent something else. They sell and buy, and so on. We made a big poster for each option and then stuck up comments on each using a format called Rose, Thorn, Bud, which, not to be too meta, is also a conversation design. We could have done pluses and minuses. We could have done a SWOT analysis on each. But Rose, Thorn, Bud, which is from the Boy Scouts of America, is a kind of friendly design for conversational analysis. We used different colors of Rose, Thorn, Bud, a trick I learned from teaching design thinking with the Luma Institute. And after our meeting, we had a visual heat map of how the whole family felt about all the options on the table. It really helped my folks step back from the confusion of choice and get some clarity about the steps ahead. And it helped my mom realize that she and my dad haven't tried living in enough other places, in fact, no other places, to make a choice about living somewhere else, and that they ought to figure that out before they sell. That, in essence, is Dave's point about drawing, making a series of triangulations for a conversation. Rather than one person trying to hold all those points in mind, we used color and space to do it for us. A board for each future for my parents, and a map of each future. Another point Dave makes towards the end that I want to highlight about conversation design. When I'm designing a group workshop, the question of size and time comes up. He talks about watching people at parties and how 3 to 5 people can hold together pretty naturally. But at 6 to 8 it splits, unless there's someone holding it together. Someone famous, magnetic, or especially entertaining. There's some math there, just like how paper increases the points of triangulation to give clarity. If 4 people generate 3 to 5 Post-its, that's about 20 stickies. And that's lots of possible combinations as they try to discuss and organize them all. If you add just one more person, that's a 25% increase in raw information. and increases the combination of possibilities exponentially. To expect that group to process the increased information in the same period of time is just unfair. That's where a facilitator can help. By making a first action clearer and taking some options off the table, or by giving more time, a clearer organizational framework, making the stickies all contain the same types of categories of content, or by making sure the group sizes are all consistent. On the face, conversation design for group work can seem so fuzzy, but I feel like there's a lot of quantitative thinking and actual math that goes on behind it. Thanks for listening and enjoy the episode, and I'll see you next time. So I want to officially welcome you, Dave Gray. Thank you so much for making time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you too, and I'm so sorry I'm late.
It's okay. So I'm wondering, to start things off, I'm wondering if you can tell the story from Zen Flesh, Zen Bones about emptying your cup and why it's relevant to your work in liminality.
There's a very old story from the Zen Buddhism about a guy who goes to a teacher, and he's wanting to learn Zen from this guy, and he already knows a lot about Zen, and at least he thinks he does, and he is talking to the guy, and the guy asks him if he wants some tea, and the guy says, "Sure, I'll have some tea." And the teacher starts pouring tea into his cup, and it keeps pouring it, and it's overflowing. And the guy says, "I'm not telling this very well," but the guy says, "Wait, you're pouring too much tea. It's overflowing out of my cup." And he said, "Well, that's the thing. If you want to learn Zen, first you have to empty your cup. Otherwise, I can't pour any knowledge into your brain." Something along those lines.
What about that story speaks to you?
Well, I think we're all walking around with our heads very full of information and knowledge, and we have a whole ton of experiences, and we have all these beliefs and judgments that are well formed, usually based on many experiences, and it's easy to forget that our experiences don't necessarily invalidate other people's experiences. They can be very valid in and of themselves, but that does not mean that other people who have different experiences that have led to different beliefs, it doesn't mean that their beliefs are invalid. And just because, and so in order to truly understand or try to understand where another person is coming from, you first have to empty your cup of all of your own preconceptions and notions, because those things will interfere with your ability to listen.
Yeah, and so what struck me about that is that I wasn't sure, because I grew up with that book in my house, and it seems like, oh, that's so smart and so clever, but I don't know if that actually changed the mind of that guy, because the story ends, right? And it's one of those, a little bit of like it's like, fuck you, Zen, I guess you'd call it. And so this question, I think there's something in your book where you said a lot of change initiatives have managers running around telling people that they need to change their behavior while not changing their behavior at all. And I feel like you wrote this book to try and get people to step out of things, maybe because telling somebody to step out of their things doesn't always work.
I set out to, I embarked on this book for a number of reasons, but one of them was that I've spent a lot of my life focused on explaining things. And of course, in order to explain something, you first have to understand it yourself. But what I have found is that, explaining things, people feel that confusion or a lack of clarity is getting in the way of them getting things done in an organization. But often, I've actually found is common, not uncommon at least, that you are being perfectly clear and people understand you perfectly well, and rather than just say no to your face, they say, I'm not sure I understand that. They say they're confused. It's a polite way to say no. But the fact is, sometimes people say they are confused or they don't understand when they actually do understand very well. They just aren't going to do it. And so I think there's a whole set of activities that I think that need to accompany explanation. When you're trying to achieve results by coordinating and organizing the action of a group of people, whether you're their boss or not, whether you're trying to lead a movement or make some kind of change happen in the world, it is important that people understand where they fit, what they need to do, who needs to do what, what's the vision, what's the goal. But there also has to be an emotional connection. They have to care. And I think that's a thing that is not really fully recognized and understood in a lot of organizational change initiatives. And the reason a lot of things of that type are not successful has to do with people not really. Maybe they were explained what they need to do, and but maybe a paycheck wasn't reason enough.
Well, it's not
for them to do it.
People have. Yeah. I mean, I don't think people are really thinking about the money on the table when they show up for work every day. They do it because of a sense of duty, a sense of respect. It's habit, and all of these things need to be broken down, I guess, so something's going to be done in a different way. The thing that's interesting is that, like, people have to want to hold that space differently. You are willing to say, you know what, I maybe I don't know everything, and you're in a place where you're very open to hearing new things. The question I have is, like, I think people always ask this question of, like, oh, how do I get people to change their minds? Right? Which is, and what you're saying is, well, you have to accept that maybe your mind needs to be changed too, which is a very Eastern way of looking at the problem. But I still I have a sense that you have a way that you go into these conversations and design them in such a way that people can step out of themselves. I'm wondering if you can help me and understand, how do you invite people to step into that space where maybe something surprising is going to happen?
I do think it's fair. I mean, you sort of said it without explicitly saying it. You sort of hinted at it, which is, okay, so you're gonna go into a conversation where you're expecting someone to change their mind, and you're not willing to change your mind. Well, so why should they change theirs then? I mean, if you're not willing to enter into that conversation with the concept that your mind might be changed, why should they? Why should anyone?
Yeah.
Because you're the boss? Well, I mean, that doesn't give you, the boss gives you, I guess that sort of, to some degree, gives you control over their body, but not over their mind.
Yeah, well, this is power in organization. I can tell you to do something because I say so, but that's a very, very limited amount of power. Whereas I think what we're talking about is almost like Newton's second law, where for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. Maybe the more I'm willing, I want to ask somebody to change their mind, I should realize that maybe the equal amount of change has to happen on my side. But that's a tall order. I don't think people come in thinking that way.
Yeah, I mean, what is it? Maybe it's good. Maybe it would be good to try and have a quick chat about what you're hoping to achieve with this whole idea of designing conversations. And should conversations be designed? Should they be designed?
Right. Maybe. And this is something that we talked about last time, is where should you avoid designing these conversations, because there are some things that shouldn't, you talked about, the marriage proposal, where, there's a conceit that you should be the one to design that conversation instead of it being co-created and designed participatively. And I think there's that question of, like, yeah, there's a risk to designing a conversation because of bias, because of, going back to your book, Game Storming, which started a lot of my thinking around this, where, we're at point A and we think we need to go to point B, but do we really know what point B is? If we have a really clear idea of where we're going, then let's go there. But very often,
well, if we have a really clear idea of what point B is, then why have a conversation at all?
Right. That's the thing that I find interesting and inspiring about the idea of conversation design, is that we are doing it anyway. I think there are these implicit ways that we're trying to manipulate people and manipulate ourselves, but in good ways and bad ways. And questions of leadership and organization, this stuff touches on all of it, and it's stuff that I find very very inspiring, partly because of the tension as a facilitator that I feel between control and surprise. And
what kind of things are you facilitating these days?
So I tend to do workshops, where generally teaching people about design thinking. And in that sense, what I'm facilitating is getting them to step outside of their normal way of thinking and to step into a willingness to try new things. Right. So, and even in those things, I'm navigating the balance of, I know exactly what's going to happen versus showing up and being surprised and responding to what's happening in the room.
Yeah.
And so for that, to me, I think that's, maybe you called this almost being a playground designer, where you create the space for people to play. And that's something I enjoy, but there's also there's a responsibility for that as well. There's something you said last time we talked, which really struck me. You said it was like a year. It was a year ago.
It's been a while. Yeah.
You said the less I do, the happier they are with the outcome. The more they get out of it, the less I talk. The happier they are, the less I do. Yep. And there's there's a really interesting dichotomy there, especially because of...
Yeah, the ultimate facilitator probably would do nothing.
Right, but then then the question is, what are they paying for? Right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, it was quite interesting insight for me and counterintuitive. You think I'm showing up. They're paying me a lot of money. I'm showing up. They're putting a lot of trust in me. I better be prepared. I better do all my homework. I better get everything designed and buttoned down and tightened up and cleaned up and all that. But yeah, it is interesting. It was an interesting discovery. I was like, wow, I'm doing less and they're liking it more. I'm doing even less and they're liking it even more. What I'm creating is a very, very lightweight, playground is a good word for it, but a very lightweight structure that I suppose it is conversation. It's some kind of design, but I'm creating a structure for them to achieve their goals. It's almost like someone if someone gives you let's say you have to go do a book proposal, right?
Hypothetically,
it's easier if someone gives you a template,
sure.
Right? Okay, here are the things that need to go into a book proposal. Here's the questions you need to answer. That's way easier than just starting from scratch and trying to create a book proposal. To me, that's like what a lightweight structure does. It gives you the business model. Have you seen the business model canvas by Alex Osterwalder? All right, so that's a very lightweight structure. All it is 9 boxes with 9 labels.
Yeah.
It doesn't give you a business. You still have to come up with a business model. You still have to fill that up. But what it does is it helps you ask the right questions to get you quickly into those parts of dialogue and thinking and conversation that you need to do, and it helps you avoid a lot of the dead ends and runarounds and red herrings that you might otherwise follow that could waste a lot of time.
Yeah, what I find so interesting about this is that you could sit down and say, let's talk about our business model, and have it, like you said, be completely unstructured. And there is this benefit to breaking it out into little chunks and saying, we're going to take an hour and we're going to spend 10 minutes talking about each one of these things. Well, you'd need an hour and a half. We'll take an hour and a half, talk about every little chunk of it. And that would be a more productive conversation than the same 5 or 6 people sitting around a table having an unstructured conversation, potentially.
Right.
And so that's that structure is so helpful. There's some things that it was really interesting to go back through my notes about our conversation, because I think there's some things you do that I do, and it's really interesting to hear you talk about them. And I feel like there are things that I've discovered in practice and that you've discovered in practice, and I want to unpack why you think it works. And one of them is the rhythm of these kinds of spaces, because there seems to be a pace to it. And we talked about space for introverts and extroverts. It's like this opening and closing that you talk about, quiet time, person, table, room, and making this sort of undulating experience for people that allows a lot to happen in a very short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, just for yourself, like how does that, how did you come there, or how does it feel for you? Like, what is it like for you as the person who's holding that space?
Yeah, I guess I spent a lot of time observing and things that worked and what worked. And, when you, like, if you were to go to a giant cocktail party in a giant room and you're just going to look around, and I've done this a few times and made little diagrams of, okay, well, people tend to form circles of 3 to 5 people, or 2 to 5 people. If it's any larger a group than that, it's probably because it's got someone in that circle is famous, or really got charismatic, or have really captured attention. So there are sometimes you'll see larger circles, and usually there's one person that's a really good storyteller or really interesting. And you also find that there are certain periods of time at which they will break up. So you'll see that those circles of people you might observe, that they might stay together for 5-10 minutes, and then they tend to drift. People tend to drift into other circles. So if you just watch how people organically interact with each other, and the size of the groups, how long a time they spend together, you start to see that these are kind of some natural flows of conversation. They kind of like, okay, if some people don't need to talk much, they'll be there, they'll be quiet. Some people, or even like a dinner table, you'll see people talk to the left, talk to the right, talk across. You watch how those patterns form and how long they stay. And just, if you take, and I did this for a while, take a little notebook and just start taking notes and observing these things. When you have nothing to do with it, what are the natural flows? You start to get a sense of those patterns. And there are, for certain things, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, anything more than 15, anything more than 20, forget it. You got to change it up at least every 20 minutes to keep people engaged. And I think those patterns also might change. The last time I actually did any observing of this was before mobile phones. I think mobile phones have changed that dynamic a lot. Maybe perhaps even social networks have changed the amount of attention and so forth. So, I mean, if you're a facilitator, you want it to feel comfortable. You want it to feel natural. You don't want to be putting people in awkward, if you put them in an awkward situation, you want to have a reason that you
intentionality behind it.
Okay, you're gonna have you facing opposite directions, and you're gonna have a conversation or something that to make a point or to help people see or find something. But for as a general rule, I think you want to be if you're designing for interaction and conversation and learning, you want to be able to create the kinds of things that are delightful in life.
And your patterns are mirroring that natural arrangement. I find it really interesting because when you arrange a group of people and the numbers are going to be like, there's 4 or 5 people per group, there's a certain amount of work that they can do in a certain amount of time. And the client sometimes will be like, oh, there's 3 more people, or there's 4 more people that need to come, or there's 6 more people need to come. Can we just do groups of 7? And the math doesn't work out. When there's like 2 more people in the group, and there's suddenly like 50% more information in the group. So that same group of people can't have a 10-minute conversation. There's just not, there's too much information, I think, in that group for them to hold that space for themselves. Yeah, for sure. And I think it's also really important, I think, to have equal number of people at each table, because if you have, and I basically tell people this explicitly when I'm in a workshop, and there's one table with 3 and one with 7. I say, we need to balance this, because what's going to happen is every time I give you an exercise, the 3-person table is going to be done early, and they're going to be bored, and the 7-person table is going to be late, and it takes longer to do something with 7 people than it takes to do with 3, and all the 5-person tables are going to be like frustrated because they're in between. So we need to get 2 people from this table over to this table. Who wants to volunteer? I know you probably sit with your friends, but let's, So I will explicitly do that, and I think that is an important thing. Load balancing in a room. I'd be okay with every table having 7, way more than some having 7 and some having 5. Because you want the energy in the room to be consistent. And I find, well, if you're going to be doing exercises or activities, you want to be, for example, people able to pair up. You want people able to form 2 and 3-person clusters or whatever you have in mind. You want to make it easy for everyone to participate, and you don't want people feeling left out. Now, if there are people, I do invite people. If you just want to observe the workshop and you don't want to do the activities, that's fine. But I want you to actually make that explicit by sitting not at a table. So I know, take a chair, put it by the wall, and, be an observer if you want to be an observer. You don't have to participate. I generally feel pretty uncomfortable with, if you're in the room, I feel like, there's that, you're trying to create the safe space and you want people to sort of be present. And if this person's not sharing something, but they're taking something, it feels unequal to me. So I generally, I know that sometimes you have to let, the sponsor walk through and absorb some stuff. I try to be very careful about that personally, just because if we're creating a space, then they should be part of it. My feeling is that it depends. It all depends. But my feeling is, if someone just wants to watch the workshop and they don't want to participate, they're not going to get as much out of it, but that should be okay. And if they, I often feel that way. I want to, I guess I've done so many of these. I'm kind of like, I don't want to do the exercises half the time. I don't want to be. I don't know. I think it depends. So that's actually. But I do want to make it explicit. I don't sit at the table and not do the exercises. Yeah. If it's almost like what I do is I will create a fishbowl kind of in the room. Like, okay, you can be in the stands, or you could be on the playing field. You have to pick, though. Can't be, you have to be one or the other. So, Dave, you said something that resonates for me around, I feel very comfortable when I'm orchestrating these things. It's very challenging for me to put myself in the position of letting someone else do those things for me. Yeah. Well, why is that? I don't know. Part of it is because I think there's trust, and then I'm used to being in control. Yeah, I don't know if that's what it is for me. I think it's more. I'm often where I want to sample 3 or 4 different workshops, because I have one in the morning and I'm free in the afternoon. So I want to actually pop my head into 3 or 4. I don't want to disrupt anything, but I want to actually observe more than one. Maybe there's a control thing. Although when I do a workshop, I don't really I don't feel like I have
I'm giving people a lot of control over what they do.
You don't, you feel like you are, or you feel like you're not?
I feel like I give people a lot of control, including the control of not participating if they don't want to. Because that's what I would want, honestly. I would want the autonomy. I'm not here to, I'm here because I want to learn from you, but I don't necessarily want to dance for you. Even if you are teaching dancing. Maybe I prefer to observe the dance other people learning for a while,
So what this goes back to, and we talked about finite and infinite games, I think, a little bit. If you're designing a playground for people, anybody who must play cannot play.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, I think that's true. So I guess that's part of what I'm trying to do is create that opportunity for people to say, yeah, I choose to do this. And even if no one chooses to be on the outside, I've at least created the space that makes it their choice, not my choice.
And this is a very interesting leadership style. Creating the space for other people to be great requires a very secure type of leader.
Yeah, it can be hard sometimes. I mean, for sure. Creating space, and maybe the people won't step up, or maybe they can't. Maybe they don't have the skills, and but I do think it pays off. I mean, I found.
Yeah, I mean, so in workshop is a place where there's a lot of control, but in the actual workplace, seems like there's less control. How do you see what you do at your consultancy leading that way? Are there similarities between this tight controlled and the sort of the larger, longer, less controlled type of leadership?
Well, it's funny because I would say you actually have less control in a workshop. I mean, you can't fire people from a workshop if they're not working out. I mean,
that's true. I don't think I've ever banned somebody in the middle of a workshop.
Right. I mean, in the workplace, if someone's not performing, you can fire them. I mean, literally. So you have a lot more. Let's just put it this way: you have a lot more control over who's in versus out of the workplace than you do on who's in versus out of a workshop. You don't pick the people. When you do a workshop, you're not looking at resumes and interviewing people. They just they pay and they show up. When you're in a workplace, that's a different story. I mean, I remember, like, for example, when I was a teacher, I was frustrated by the shitty students that I would get that I would never, you're not even trying. Why are you? I don't even want you here. You don't want to be here. I don't want to teach you. I don't want to be dragging you, kicking and screaming. I don't want to be the prison warden style teacher. So we'll have, I guess, this agreement that I'm going to ignore you, and you do what you do, and I'll give you this grade. And I'm going to focus on. I mean, I always felt I would always prefer to focus my attention on the kids that wanted to learn and were interested and curious. And I never felt that it was fair to hold them back for some kid who didn't care and didn't want to try. And I had some interesting dynamics play out. I remember one time I had a class, and I told the students that they would get to give themselves a grade. They would get to grade themselves on this project. And like the laziest, most spoiled, rotten kid in the class was like, okay, so let me get this right. I could do absolutely nothing, and I would give myself an A, and I would get an A for this project. And I said, yeah, that's right. And the lesson, that was a lesson. That was a lesson in itself. The lesson was not for him, though. The lesson was for this other girl who got so mad at me. She got so, because here's the thing. Because she knew, and I knew, and she knew I knew, and I knew she knew, that she was going to turn in something excellent and give herself a C.
Hey, this is Daniel. we're about at the halfway point, so this is a great time. You might want to get up, stretch your legs, and get some popcorn, fill up your soda. Also, head over to theconversationfactory.com and sign up for the newsletter. Stay in touch. I'm always trying to extract some best practices from these interviews and make some great tools, turn them into PDFs to share with you. And those are things I send to my subscribers, so make sure you head on over to theconversationfactory.com, sign up for the newsletter, and stay in touch.
The lesson was for her because she needed to let go of the teacher being the authority on what is good or not, and she needed to step up and own some of that for herself. And I honestly didn't care. This kid's still get a C in the class. He's going to get an A on one project. It's not going to change. It's not going to change anything.
But in life, you really do give yourself your own grade, right?
That's right. That's right. That's right. And she needed to step up. And honestly, it was part of it was the lesson for her. Part of it was for me stepping up and saying, "Hey, look, I'm not taking on this authority that you are needing me to take. I'm not going to step into this relationship and give you that. No, you are at least intending to be an adult. You have to take this responsibility on. And if you're going to give yourself a C, you're going to deal with the consequences of giving yourself a C.
Yes.
And if you really think you deserve an A, you're going to have to say that."
Which is scary, which is just as scary, honestly. I mean, it takes a certain...
She was fucking furious.
But she should learn to give herself an A.
She was so angry at me. I think she even went to my boss, trying to get me in trouble.
That's really interesting, though, because, I had a teacher who once told me, she's like, why can't you just work a little less hard and get a B instead of stressing out so much? And it's a challenge. I think everyone needs to learn for themselves how much effort they want to put in and what good looks like to them.
Yeah, it's funny, that kid, the lazy kid I was talking about, was really spoiled. He came up to me like 10 years later at some event. He walked up to me and said, "Hey, I just want to apologize because I was a total shit at that period of my life, and I really could have learned a lot from you, and I didn't. And I want to tell you I'm sorry." No, I was pretty
maybe he did. He clearly did learn something from you. After all, to know that he didn't learn something is actually an amazing lesson, I think.
It was really a nice moment when he did come up and say that to me. Actually came to apologize. He was
What were you teaching them at the time?
It was art. I was in the art school at Washington University, visual communications. So it was, I guess what has been called over time different things. Commercial art, visual communication, illustration, design.
You said something in our last conversation that I really loved. You said, when I make a drawing, I am having a conversation with myself. And I think visual communication is really important, but also visual thinking, which is something that it feels like a lot of people who I work with it's alien to them because they think I can't draw. But you don't have to draw great to be able to think great with a pencil and a paper.
Yeah, writing is drawing. If you can write, writing is drawing, literally. If you look at the history of Chinese art, the Chinese don't really make a distinction between writing and drawing. Every Chinese painting is a poem as well. Like literally got words on them, and in fact, the same techniques that you use with the brush to make letters are the techniques you use to make drawings, and they even have names for them. The names for the marks that you can make, like dots like there's dots like black pepper, and there's dots like leaves, and there's dots like specks of water, and there's lines like tangled wire, and there's lines like grass, and there's there's lines like there's dots like axe cuts. There's a language there, and I think perhaps because that the whole language emerged as a thing that was done with a brush as opposed to a carving or a pen, like a sharp line. There's a lot more flexibility and a lot more interesting dynamics around it. But I think if you are if you're making marks on a sheet of paper, you're drawing.
It's kind of humbling and eye-opening because I think words are symbols too. Take the morning pages, just writing 3 pages in the morning. That's having that conversation with yourself. Even if you don't have to be drawing pictures, you can just be getting out those words and pulling it out.
Yeah, journaling. Yeah. I mean, if you write the letter A, it's not an A. It's not a sound that sounds like ah or a. It's a picture that you can translate into a sound in your head. It's a picture that we have an agreed understanding of what it means. But if no one had ever spoken and we could learn the language, we would not. I mean, we could learn that visual language without ever having verbal or spoken language. It could be learned.
Well, so what I'm curious about, I mean, we started with this idea of how do you change somebody's mind? And the question is like, well, we have to, really comes on to us to change our own mind. When we have a drawing or we have words and we share it with someone else, there's this misunderstanding that can happen that can be positive. You told me a story about you drew the bubble, this loop around someone's head, and somebody said, oh, that's a bubble. And that's the bubble of belief that they're in. And you were like, oh, yes, and I guess it is a bubble. And this bubble has this new way of getting you thinking about it. And so I think there's this wonderful process of both expressing yourself, but then reaching out of yourself and sharing it with someone else, and then absorbing or celebrating what comes back.
Yeah, I actually think you could think of it as like, okay, you sort of, when you're there and I'm here, you're sort of occupying the space inside of your head, right? I'm kind of sitting him somewhere at a point, inside of my head somewhere, right? And we're having this conversation. You could say that the conversation is in the air in the middle, right? In a way. But if we now put a drawing into that space and let's say we create a drawing together, now we actually have 3 points of triangulation. We have where you are, where I am, and the drawing. And now we have actually 3 different perspectives. And if you do a drawing and if I do a drawing, and if we have 2 drawings, now we have four points of triangulation, and we can overlap. And what we can find is that, let's say I ask you to draw a picture of, what does a good conversation look like? And I draw a picture of what a good conversation looks like. And now we can compare what you're saying with what I'm saying with what is on your picture and what's on my picture. We now have probably a far richer and more interesting conversation, because maybe I've drawn a campfire in my picture, and that ties you in to go, oh, why'd you put a fire in the middle? What is it about the fire what's the fire have to do with the conversation? How does that work? And you might have put something else in there, or maybe there's people with cones on their heads or something, and I have to ask, well, why'd you put the cones? What are the cones for? Well, those are the megaphones. They have to take them off so they can talk to each other or they can listen, but they keep them on their heads when they're not using them.
That seems
I don't know.
Convenient.
So the drawing, and I had a customer recently remind me that I used to say this all the time to customers, which was the first drawing is always wrong. So you can expect it to be wrong. It's going to be wrong. The purpose of it is to put a flag in the ground or a stake in the ground to say, okay, how do we make the right drawing? Because we can't make the right drawing until we do the wrong drawing and we have the conversation about what's wrong about it. So we have to start with the drawing that's wrong. And this goes back, for me, way back to when I was in grade school, drawing to try and understand and showing my drawings to the teacher and getting the teacher to correct the drawing is, for me, that the drawing as a as a kind of focal point to like a sort of something that it could be a, you know, when I say a drawing is a conversation with yourself, it doesn't have to be only with yourself. A drawing can be a conversation between any number of people.
Yes.
You know, a drawing can be a conversation of, and I think and what's a map but a drawing that a lot of people have agreed on? That's all it is. I mean, the border between Missouri and Illinois is on a map. Is just, or you know, that's not a good one because there's a river there. But let's take somewhere there isn't a river. There's just a straight line. That's just somebody drew that. It is something that we all agreed to. It's on the map. The map is or you know, any legal document is a document that is kind of basically saying this is what we've agreed to. This is a thing that's outside of ourselves that we're going to agree on. But it's usually has to go through multiple iterations and multiple drafts before you get there.
So it's like that guy, you know, have you ever been to like the Four Corners? It's a spot in the West that means it's like
yeah, I may have.
And there's nothing there. Sure. But because of the map,
right.
you're standing in four states at once. It's a meaningless thing.
Right.
So you said something that's so interesting. This process of, I love getting people to concretize their thoughts before sharing them. Right? Mm-hmm. Having that conversation with yourself where you say, this is what I think about this thing, before you have that meeting with another person. You said it before, there's an interface, and there's always an interface when you and I are having a conversation. It's air. But when we put it on paper, it's more physical, and there's more points of connection that we've made them more real. And I feel like in these sort of everyday meetings that people have, they're very resistant to writing things down in the way that we do in workshops because it feels slower and it feels artificial. But anytime somebody says, you know, I got everyone to write down what they thought first, and then we talked about it, we had a better conversation. And there's just something very special about that.
I agree.
There's another question I had for you around monkeys watching monkeys. And monkeys watching monkeys. We talked about this last time. We talked about entrainment, right? Oh, yeah. I think there's something about this in conversation. You know, there's a group at the beginning, the middle, and the end of a group conversation. I feel like there is this entrainment that happens where everybody's patterns kind of lock in at some point. And I'm wondering if you've seen that, and if you have any thoughts around what makes that happen, or what that's like.
Oh yeah, well, it happens in organizations. It happens in any group, I think. You know, you've seen the candid camera episodes where like some guy just faces the wall in the elevator and takes off his hat and faces the wall. Everyone who comes in the elevator does the same thing. Okay, take off my hat and face the wall, and that's the way they do it here, and they don't even ask and why, and so I think I think, you know, it's maybe easy to forget we're social creatures. We want to fit in. We do things in order to not to stand out and fit in. I mean, in Australia, they actually have a name for it. They call it the tall poppy syndrome. And I think they say that it has to do with it being a penal colony, and you didn't want to step, when you're in prison colony, you don't want to stand out because the tallest poppy gets its head cut off.
Yes, it does.
And so the tall poppy syndrome basically is this tendency that Australians have not to raise their hand, not to volunteer. And it does show up in workshops where it's like, okay, you know, I'm not going to step out. I'm not going to volunteer. I'm not going to share my thing. And I actually turned that around in that case. Once I understood the syndrome had a name, I made a joke out of it. I would start every workshop and say, okay, I know we have this tall poppy syndrome here, but I'm American, so I'm going to create a little bubble American land here in Australia. We're going to have this workshop, and you're in America. Just act like an American, and it's okay. Like, so we're creating this little, we're claiming this little space, and this is how it's going to operate. And I need everyone to be okay with that.
That's so, and you got people to basically say, suspend their disbelief, play along.
Oh yeah, they laugh. People laugh. They laugh and they play along. Yeah, it's like the magic circle. It's like finite and infinite games, or the circle of play. You prescribe an imaginary boundary. You create some rules, and you tell people this is how it's going to work, or it's okay. And you've actually created that psychological safe zone that lets them do that. Because the fact is, they wanted to. No one could go first.
Yeah. So this is really interesting, Dave. Like, there is something about the conversation designer creating an invitation, and the invitation can be humorous.
Yeah. Sure. Like, yeah. Or a provocation.
Right.
In game storming, we call it the spark. We called it the spark because we didn't have a good word for it, but we said that there needs to be a spark. Something to light the fire. It's like, if you think about what needs to happen in a conversation or a room as a form of energy, which I do, then it's just like a gas stove or something. It's just gonna push gas out unless you have a spark to light it. So a fire is not going to start itself. You need you're going to have all the kindling and everything there, but you still have to light it. And so I do think there is something about an invitation can be a spark, but it can also be look, this group is not, we need to challenge ourselves. We cannot continue to tell ourselves we're great. We need to step up and blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's different ways to create that spark. Invitation is one of them. I do think that people need to be, sort of invited. I guess that's what I'm doing when I tell people they don't need to participate if they don't want to. I'm creating an invitation. It's an invitation to come closer or to step back, but either is okay.
I have to tell you, I'm going to try to model that in my own work because, I do trainings. People have to step out. They have to take calls. And I tell them at the beginning, I say, if I could give you one gift, it would be to be fully present here with me because I'm going to be fully present with you. And I value my time and I try to give them 100% of myself.
Yeah.
It is very hard for me to let go of. I think I used to be more insulted. I'm less insulted by it now.
Well, a way to do it, here's a couple, just tips, like practitioner tips. A way to do it is to say, okay, we have 4 sections of the day. We have the morning, there's a break. There's the afternoon, there's a break. There's a mid-morning, there's a break. There's an afternoon, early, if you are going to have to take a call, skip the whole 90 minutes. Just, if you know that's going to happen, just take that whole 90 minutes, check your email, step out. If that's one way to do it. I think I also try to create enough space with exercises to say, hey, if you need to go use the bathroom, we're going to have these breaks for, it's going to be 5 minutes for this or 10 minutes for that. Those are good times for you to step out and do that thing. But I really, I don't know. There's different ways to do it, depending on the culture that you're in.
No, and I realize that one has to be generous. There was a guy, God bless him, he really loved what we were doing, and he was like, I have to be on this 90-person call. He's like, I'm just gonna have this in my ear. I will be, his half of his brain was better than most people's full brain. So I was like, I understand. You're just gonna be half listening to both of us, and you just, that's what he could give me. So that's what he gave me. Somebody could be doing that without even be telling me.
Yeah.
They could be sitting there in the room and be worried about, something else completely. So at least he was being honest with me about it.
That's right. Yeah. There's a lot of art to it, what you bring to it. Everyone's got a different style. I think your leadership style and your workshop style often are going to be similar, right? What I have never believed in the I've never been a fan of the neutral facilitator who doesn't care. I've always felt, actually, I do have opinions, and if I'm going to. Actually, part of the reason for game storming was to create structure that allowed me to step out of the facilitator zone and express opinions and say things. Because, part of the value of a facilitator can be their opinion.
That's sort of eye-opening to hear you say that, because I feel like I try to hold the process and not the content. That it's dangerous for me to own or to nudge them in a direction.
Yeah, no, I hear that. That's the conventional wisdom. I just happen to disagree with it.
So tell me about that. When do you feel like it's appropriate for you to step in as a facilitator on the content side?
If I see them walking down a path that I've seen many others go that's fruitless, if I think they're wasting their time on something, if I feel that we are not on pace to get done what they need to get done. Like say I'm at Ford and I see them going down a path that I already saw Nokia go down, and the company's gone, right? And they're gonna go down that same path. I'm gonna let them know.
Do you bring it as a?
I'm gonna let them know.
Do you bring it as a question, or
hey, you know what? You think the car manufacturer is going to own the connected car ecosystem? That's what Nokia thought too. I don't think so. I don't think it's going to be the Ford App Store. I think it's going to be the Google App Store and the Apple App Store in the Ford car. If you think it's going to be the Ford App Store, maybe I should step out because,
That's really interesting, and I think that's fair because you have to. You're walking the line as the consultant because you.
Sometimes you have a facilitator there. Sometimes the facilitator is the only escape from groupthink. Sometimes the facilitator is the only person in the room who can actually triangulate outside of the boundaries of the bubble that the group is in. And if that is the case, then I think it's it depends on your philosophy. But I feel that when I feel it's appropriate, I feel like it is important. Like I just recently facilitated something on culture map. It was a culture mapping, long, very pretty large scale exercise. The executives came in the room and they're like, "Well, we already knew this. What's different? What's going to be different this time? We knew this stuff before. We know it now. What's going to be different?" And I was like, "Well, the difference is you can't delegate culture. You can't you're sitting here. You're talking about putting a team together to go do this. You are the leaders in this company. You have to do this. You cannot delegate this." As the facilitator, I did not have the right to do it. As the advisor, I had to do it. Because otherwise it's like, okay, you're going to delegate the weenies to go around and demonstrate and live the culture, and you're not going to do it yourselves. You have to do it. You have to take these commitments on yourself. And there's a risk to doing that. And it's like, this is, you could get fired for it. But I'm going to have to go here.
Oh, is it time? Oh yeah.
Another call. Yeah, unfortunately, it went by really fast. I owe you a half hour if you want to do something.
Yeah, let me know what works for you, because I want to think about where the open, explore, and close crosses over with liminal thinking. I think there's some meat there. Thank you so much for your time, Dave. I really appreciate it. It's great to talk to you.
Oh, yeah, my pleasure. Same here. Take care. Good to see you.
And we're going to leave it right there. Thanks for sticking around. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please check out my other episodes at theconversationfactory.com/podcast. If you want to join the conversation, don't forget to check out theconversationfactory.com/coaching to sign up for 30 minutes of free coaching that I might use on a future episode. That's theconversationfactory.com/coaching. Thanks so much for your fine attention, and I'll see you next time.